Hey, what's happening, Wargamers? So over the past year, we've been seeing tons of releases coming out of Games Workshop, and I think one of the ones that have really hit one of the highest notes for them has been the release of the newest version of Kill Team. Now, obviously, this is not the first one. We've been seeing versions of Kill Team going back quite a few editions. We've been seeing a lot of fan-made ones, and generally speaking, there's always been a demand for a skirmish-level version of Warhammer 40k, and the latest version of Kill Team has really been scratching that itch for a lot of people. Add to that, we've been seeing a lot of really nice support. They've been putting out tons of new releases for it, from Rogue Trader to Commanders to Elites. They've gotten an FAQ out and designer commentary about it. Lots of great kill zones, so there's been lots coming out for it. So this particular video, I'm actually going to be talking about the Grey Knights and how they fit into it. And the reason behind this is because I did just recently cap off a Kill Team League at my local game store, and very proud to say that my Grey Knights did come in first at the very end of it all. Very, very tough matches up against a number of different kill teams, neck and neck with Tau and Tyranids throughout the entire thing. So I am just making this video to share my thoughts on using Grey Knights in Kill Team, especially with the elites having been released. Now, just as an early disclaimer, I will not be touching on the use of Commanders or Arena. The very specific point of this is that I have not had a chance to try Commanders out, and I've had very limited experience with Arena. So unfortunately, I will not be dealing with those ones. I will be talking about the Grey Knight Kill Team just in general and how it can be used in most versions of the game. So, sit down and have a listen, and of course, if you like what you hear, be sure to always hit that like button and subscribe. But without further ado, let's get going. So the Grey Knights themselves, just to get it right off the bat, they fill an interesting role in Kill Team itself. They are a very small team. If you're not using any sort of upgrades or advancements and whatnot, you're looking at maybe 5 members of a kill team at the standard 100 points. At 125, you can fit in a 6th member, but that also comes at the expense of not using one of the elites. So you're always dealing with a small number of Marines on the table. And this runs right into the very first problem that people always encounter with the Marines and any small force. And that is that you're always going to be short bodies. This can come in the form of taking and holding objectives. This can be in the form of as soon as you lose a model, it ends up really costing the team. You end up being down a lot on that front. So basically, the whole idea with Grey Knights is that you really have to know what movement to use when you have it available, what tactic that you should be basically playing into, and trying to avoid falling into some of the traps. Now, of course, this is offset by some of the strengths that the Grey Knights have. One of the big ones, and everyone will talk about this, is the use of Cybolt, especially with elites now being available. Cybolt basically allows you to use any of the Grey Knights on the table and basically throw a mortal wound on the closest enemy model within 12 inches to whatever Grey Knight Marine is activating for it. And it allows you to do that twice. And mortal wounds in this game are very useful to have, because basically you're bypassing the wound status, you're bypassing the saves. The only thing that can save it is disgustingly resilient, or other feel no pain style mechanic. The other thing Grey Knights really have going for them is that they are sort of a great all-rounder team. They have very solid melee, they have very solid shooting. Now, that's not to say they have the best of either, but they can definitely put up a good fight in either regard. But that also falls into one of the traps that I've seen Grey Knight players sort of step into, and that's assuming that they are a melee army, or they can hold up a little bit better in a firefight than they actually can, which is not the case at all. A lot of people look at the Nemesis Force weapons for the Grey Knights thinking that this is going to be the great equalizer for them. Get into combat, they have these weapons that eat through a lot of the armor save. Most of them have a -2 AP. The sword has the -3. All of them deal multiple points of damage, D3 points of damage, with the hammer dealing 3 points even. But the problem is that they run into the issue where the standard Grey Knight only has a single attack. Now, this changes with the Justicar, this changes with the Terminators, the Paladins. and it changes with the combat specialist. But that single attack means that even though you have really solid weapons to work with, you're not able to convert it as often into a hit, into a wound, and as a result, you're not forcing injury rolls to be made. So it's good combat, but they will be outclassed by more dedicated combat units in the game. The same can be said for their shooting. The fact that they have storm bolters as their stock weapon is an absolutely fantastic addition. 2 shots at 24 inches or 4 shots at 12 inches, all hitting on 3s before modifiers. It's an incredibly solid weapon to have for your standard item. And then their heavy weapons themselves have some merit to it. The Incinerator is probably one of the best flamers in the game. Strength 6, -1 AP, D6 hits. It's a great weapon, of course, limited by its range. The Silencer, 6 shots at strength 4. Solid weapon, not the greatest, but D3 damage really makes it shine in some cases. And then you have the Psy Cannon, which is only 4 shots, but it is the higher strength weapon. It's able to wound Marines a little bit more easily. It does have an AP value to it, which makes it decent, but frankly, I find that it's always kind of overshadowed by the Psy Cannon. I always prefer to take the Silencer, not the Psy Cannon. I always feel that it's better to get the extra shots on the Silencer than the extra strength shots on the Psy Cannon, especially considering a lot of your targets you're going to be wounding on a 4+ or better anyway. It's not often you're going to encounter toughness 5 in the game, of course, Death Guard or some of the new elite models and whatnot, but generally speaking, wounding on a 4+ isn't too bad, especially when you're working with a solid amount of damage that can be put through for it. However, unlike a lot of other dedicated shooting forces in the game, they can only put up so much of a fight. You're always going to be outshot by by a lot of other forces for that matter, and you don't have access to things like the plasma guns, the melta guns, the rail rifles, ion rifles, or even things like heavy bolters and whatnot. There's always better weapons out there, so it means you always got to pick your fights very carefully with the Grey Knights. So basically, what does it mean when I say you really got to pick your fights? So one of the first things I see a lot of people talk about when they're talking about Grey Knights is basically you want to get into melee as soon as possible. And while that's not necessarily false, it's not necessarily something you want to be doing at the same time. And the reason for this is because if you're not able to kill the target charge on the turn that you charge, you're unfortunately kind of going to suffer from the mechanics of the game, and that's when it comes around to the movement phase, the other player can just simply basically fall back out of combat, and that's going to leave your Marine stranded, being able to be shot at, with them really not going to be able to do much else besides shoot in the shooting phase. So you really need to know when it's beneficial to charge, when you can really commit to it, but it's also really good to know when it's time to sort of do, a fighting withdrawal, being able to move back. Now, of course, the scenario is going to play a lot into this one. Some scenarios are going to always force you to be moving forward, but other scenarios, especially if you're looking at things like sweep and clear, you have a little bit more leeway. You can let the other guy come to you a little bit more. I find this one works especially well with any horde style tactics. I've had great success with this against Death Guard. I've had it work against Tyranids. Even against orcs. The whole idea is let them come to you. Don't let them utilize their either superior numbers or their better close combat against you. Now, of course, the opposite is true against some other forces that maybe are a little bit squishier, a little bit easier to get through, that can still have some scary firepower, but you might be able to actually get rid of them in a go in combat. Things like Tau Fire Warriors, Pathfinders, a lot of Eldar, usually you can take out pretty easily in close combat. Guard. Those are the things where you want to get into combat to eliminate their advantage of being able to shoot. So you really need to be able to read the situation and know when you should react in a certain way, know when you should be pushing forward, know when you should be moving backwards. And this really plays into decisive use of your command points. Now, unfortunately, unlike a lot of the other factions, the stratagems for Grey Knights are not really the strongest. You have your things like your Cybold. You have the one that Heed the Prognosticators, which gives you a +1 to your save roll. You have the one that allows you to fight a second time. And then you have one that allows you to roll 3d6 when doing your psychic test. Frankly, amongst the three of them, the only one that I really get a lot of real use out of is the Cybolt ammunition, and even there it's very situational. I find the best stratagems and tactics to use for Grey Knights really come down to the generic ones that everyone has access to, things like decisive move and shot, or the tactical reroll. Mostly because the tactical reroll, that's going to allow you to reroll an injury roll, or it's going to allow you to reroll a clutch armor save. And then the decisive shot and move. Decisive move can let you get that charge in if you don't have initiative to basically try and lock something into combat before they move out of range. And decisive shot, maybe you can get that silencer shot off before the enemy will, fire whatever he has going at you. Savvy use of these stratagems can really be the difference in how your Grey Knight kill team really comes out on these ones. You can take out the key enemy models a lot sooner, decisively for that matter. You can protect your own by getting them into combat with a good decisive move. It just presents a lot of options, but you need to have your target priorities basically in a row in order to do that. You need to know what you're going for, and you can't deviate from your game plan. Basically, you need to be able to roll with the punches and adjust on the fly and know what you're working towards and keep working towards that. There are some solid tactics that you can use through various specialisms as well. I find at the level 1 they're not as useful as some of the later ones, but your mileage is going to vary on that one depending on what style of league or campaign you're playing in. And on the topic of specialisms, basically, the ones that you have access to, you have your leader, your combat, zealot, comms, heavy, veteran, and demolitions. There's a little bit of something in every one of these specialisms for you, but I find the ones that the Grey Knights really get the most mileage out of are comms and heavy. Combat is really good if you want to be taking a hammer into combat with you. Getting that second attack on a combat specialist is really nice. Zealot's really good. Throw out a pair of falchions on a guy and you run forward and get that extra attack and extra strength on the turn you charge. But I find comms and heavy are the two really nice ones. Comms because they're going to let your heavy weapon fire at a much more successful rate. Basically, adding +1 to your roll, so you're hitting on 2s before any modifiers. And heavy because, well, you can take your heavy gunner and you can move and shoot. And with Grey Knights, you really do have to be mobile. You can't always be just sitting back and shooting. It's just not something you're always able to do. There is a strong argument to be made for the veteran as well, either a veteran with double falchions or a veteran with an incinerator. Being able to use the stratagem, the one command point stratagem that allows you to make a move before the game even begins, gets you into a wonderful position and can really put a lot of stress onto your opponent very early on. Puts you in a great place to either cap an objective or maybe just put a couple wounds onto things. I've used it to great success, especially against shooting armies like Tau and Guard. Really good in those situations. The last thing that you really want to consider is basically what the elites bring to the table. So outside of giving you a second Cybolt, which in and of itself is a massive bonus for the Grey Knights, they basically allow you to bring Terminators, like a Terminator Justicar, or a Paladin or Paladin Justicar. And this is a really interesting one because you're already dealing with very few numbers for your Grey Knight kill team. So you might look at the points for a lot of these elites and basically say, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you'd rather have the extra power armor guy. Now, in the case of the Paladin, I think that sentiment is absolutely right. I think what you're paying for the Paladin, especially if you want to be effective as far as close combat weapons and shooting weapons, it's just not worth the points. And it doesn't really bring much more to the table besides a slightly better leadership. So it's kind of disappointing, but I honestly say pass on the Paladin. Now, the Terminator or Terminator Justicar, I feel for only being, not quite double the points of a standard Marine. I think that there's a lot to be said about these ones, because you get that 2-up armor save, you got the extra attack with it, you got the extra wound, and that can really make a big difference. I've had a bit of chances to play around with them, and every game that I've played with them, they haven't been the game-defining model, but they've definitely been something that's forced the opponent to look at them and actually have to deal with them. And put a little bit more resources in them than just a standard power armor Marine. And that in itself can be a big deal. It can draw fire, especially some of the weapons that would otherwise remove a regular power armor Marine right on the spot. So, they can tank it a little bit more. They have their 5-up invulnerable save, they have their 2-up armor save. They're a little bit better equipped to take on some of the scarier weapons out there. Now, mind you, things like plasma guns, melta guns, rail rifles, they're still going to do a number on Terminators, but it's not as much of a guarantee as it was with them against power armor. So I think there's definitely something to be said about the Terminator. Right now, I am sort of leaning towards the argument that one Terminator is very much worth not bringing that extra power armor Marine. But again, this is where you use the roster. You know, play to the mission, to the objective. If you need to cap those objectives, you might need that extra body. If you can play a little bit more defensively, or you can play a little bit more aggressively melee-wise, maybe that Terminator is the way to go. So missions like take prisoners or sweeping clear, really nice. Bring that Terminator in. That's going to give you a nice little boost there. Anything where you're capping objectives, there's an argument to be made for the Terminator being able to come in, especially using reserve or the deep strike. But, there's also just a strong argument to make for having that extra body on the table. So in the end, where does that really leave Grey Knights? And I've seen a lot of arguments kind of putting them all over the spectrum. Before Elites, I would have easily put Grey Knights as sort of like a top middle tier. When they're firing on all cylinders, the dice are working in your favor, and you know what you're doing, the Grey Knights can definitely be a strong force on the table. They struggle a little bit in objective-style matches, anything where they have to sit on an objective, especially every turn. They're not quite as good there. If the objective is just to hold it at the end of the game, they're a little bit more capable of being contenders in that one, because you can make that last minute mad dash, or you can try and whittle down forces, on turns 1 through 3 to try and sort of have superiority over them. Anything that requires kill points in taking out your enemies, they definitely have a lot of strengths there. Cybolt allows you to take out some key units if you know what you're doing and know how to position your guys, so they have some strengths. With Elites, I think they might actually edge a little bit more into the upper tiers. Again, not top contenders. There's other armies or other kill teams that are much stronger contenders because they have the combination of numbers, durability, shooting, whichever combination you want to talk about. But they can definitely play spoiler. They're 2 Cybolts, they're rather effective shooting, they're effective melee. They can definitely come in, and they are a hard one to counter because they can do a lot of little things, as opposed to just focusing on one thing. They also take part in virtually every single phase of the game, and that can be a really big deal, making sure you know what you can do in every phase and really utilizing as best you can. So those are my thoughts on Grey Knights in Kill Team right now. So once again, really sorry I wasn't able to talk about the use of Commanders or Arena. I just do not have the experience in those particular fields to really discuss them. But hopefully you're able to take something from my thoughts on this one. I have gotten quite a bit of experience with them in the past couple months, and I mean, Grey Knights have always been one of my primary loves of the game and whatnot. So I was very happy to talk about them and share my thoughts on everything. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment below, get involved in the discussion. I always love hearing from everyone. And of course, if you like the video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It's all your support that allows me to keep doing this. And as always, happy wargaming.